Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, I don't know what time it is, wherever you are. My name's Scott and I have with me Mia Blume. We're gonna get started just 1 second here. Um, if you do me a favor, maybe while we're all gathering together, if you wouldn't mind in the chat, just dropping in where you're coming from. Evening from India, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool already from the top of the start. So awesome. Well, I'm going to stop sharing real quick here and recombobulate my computer a bit. New Jersey, Massachusetts, London. This is crazy, right? Mia, what do you think?
Pretty amazing. Thanks for coming from all around the world.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So let's just get started together today. Again, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Couple quick introductions. I'm Scott. I'm coming to you live from my basement in Philadelphia. I'm a design advocate here at Abstract, and I'm super excited to have the one and only Mia Blume from the design department. She's the former design leader at Pinterest, Square, IDEO, all kinds of great places. And in 2015, Mia started the design department to help transform the way creative leaders work. So say hi, Mia.
Hi, everyone. I'm coming in from San Francisco, so nice to chat with you all today.
Awesome. Let's see here. Just doing a technical check here. Can you pin the video? We have a little bit of, are you guys able to see our videos? Are you able to see me and Mia? All right. Let's see here. Just making sure that we get the right, we want to make sure we get the right stuff going here. Okay, cool. Cool. Technical difficulties, classic Scott, by the way, keeping it human as we sort of practiced. So a few weeks ago here at Abstract, a crew of us, we hosted a live event discussing what we learned as a 100% distributed remote team, and particularly what it's like to be on that fully distributed design team. Somewhere in the last 40 days or so, many of our industry colleagues made that rapid shift from being in real life to being at home due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's been a wild ride. So one of my favorite things on being on Zoom calls is like really seeing our pandemic haircuts. So right now, my current lack thereof, my fade is fading, as they may say. But importantly, I've really appreciated the balance of grace and resiliency that I've really seen from my cohorts in the design industry. In some ways, this makes a ton of sense. Like as designers, we should really be tuned into that human condition as we create those meaningful creations that humans use. And after all, like without empathy, what good is design, really? So I do think we're able to kind of leverage that for our own good in these uncertain times. But transparently, a lot of this time can just feel like swimming in an unpredictable current. So from us to you, we're in your corner, we're rooting for you, and let us know if there's anything we can do to help. But today I am really excited. We are going to extend that conversation a bit and kind of lean into this question that we've been kind of wrestling with here. What does it mean to build trust in a remote environment? How can we create, build, maybe rebuild trust among our colleagues, our bosses, our coworkers when we're all behind a Zoom call or a Slack message, or even in the output of our work? What's the same or what's different between in real life trust building or screened trust building? So I'm not really sure there's a better human on earth to really describe these kind of attributes and share from their experiences, wisdom, and insight more than Mia. She's been at the forefront of helping design leaders grow, transition, and embrace and become really leaders, the leaders that they've always wanted to become. So we're really excited to have you with us today, Mia. So we're going to get into it. We have a moderator, Allison. Hey. So if you have any question that comes up, drop that in our Q&A tab. That would be really helpful, and we'll try to get to those as much as possible. So I'm going to check here, make sure I'm doing the right thing for our let's see here. I'm trying to make it so that we can all see each other in a way that makes sense. Yeah, see spot. Unlike Zoom, we have to talk to the Zoom designers, like we said. Mia, cool. All right. Let's just get into the questions. Less of me, more of you. So I read a couple of days ago from a friend. They had this post out there, and the sentiment was, this isn't now just a new work from home remote thing that you're being asked to do. This is a crisis that we're all in. you're trying to and you're home trying to work basically. So let's start there. What's the last couple of weeks been like for you, kind of upfront realizing and recognizing this isn't normal?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's been a lot of ups and downs. We went into quarantine a little bit before California, and most of kind of the tech companies here did. So I felt like I experienced this wave of grief and anxiety before a lot of my clients and friends, and now our job is to support them. And so, it's been a wild ride. It's nothing that I think any of us can predict or prepare for, honestly.
So true. So true. So now that we're like way less co-located, even from our work, we've been thinking about, what's happening with digital trust or building that kind of trust through the screen. With all of this change, what do you see for those wanting to be trusted?
Yeah. Well, I would say in quote unquote normal times, I would let people know that they needed to focus on really good two-way communication and alignment. And that's still true, but I think more than ever, really people need to focus on flexibility. The best leaders are truly adaptable, and this is a time where we are being forced to be adaptable. And a huge part of that is because our work from home, like you said, this is not normal. Kids are at home, we're taking care of people that maybe we didn't have to before, services that we relied on are not available. And so we're in a completely different world. And so leaders need to be flexible and work with their teams to say, hey, what's going on with you and how can we support you? Because if you're not being adaptable and curious, then that's actually going to be a place where you break trust, because people are like, hey, you're not paying attention to what I need right now.
Sure. And even if you're divided by space, that would be important for like when you're close together, in real life again. So what about the folks in leadership who are sort of attempting to cultivate that trust? Like, how are they doing that with their teams or in their teams?
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing a whole mix of things. Some people are doing really well. And a lot of that, I think, is because, like I said to the folks at a recent workshop, good remote management is just good management. And so folks who have good practices in place around communication and things like that are doing pretty well because it extends to the new world. But remote actually highlights things that are not working. And so I think, in a combination with a bunch of bad advice that's put out there right now, for instance, the one that I'm seeing people struggle with the most right now is transparency. Yeah. So there's a lot of, PDFs and things out there saying 100% transparency, radical transparency, that's the way to go. But that's not really true. There's no such thing as 100% transparency in management. And to set expectations that there is will actually erode trust over time, because people will be like, wait a second, you didn't tell me everything. Right. And that's the reality. And so, also sometimes revealing information too soon, that form of transparency can create a lot of extra anxiety and fear. And that's something we don't need right now. So one important question to ask yourself here is, how does this information serve them? And that's a much better filter than just tell them everything.
Yeah, how does the information source? So it's interesting. So not that in leadership you're like lying or trying to willfully be hiding things, but maybe not everything is important for right now. And even maybe the other side too, like you don't necessarily need to feel as a leader that you're diving into every little detail that your team member is working on.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a time and way for communicating things. And sometimes you reveal it before that communication is ready. And so although you may be optimizing for good things like perceived transparency, you may end up communicating ineffectively.
Oh, wild. Perceived transparency. We'll dig into that. So when we were first chatting, you mentioned that these world events are really putting us into a threatened space. Use my hand gestures here. This is my threatened space hand gesture, I guess. Maybe that's a gesture for everything, actually. But so, they really are putting us into a threatened space, and our minds are kind of like responding to that threat and looking for certainty and looking for autonomy. Can you tell me more about what you meant by that, and like what is it, and what does that do for our sense of control, or maybe lack thereof even?
Yeah. Well, let's nerd out for a second a little bit. So through evolution, we as humans have developed a nervous system that is really good at identifying safety or not. So it used to be, is that a lion? Is that going to eat me? Is there a problem here? Now it's much more subtle, like, is the tone of that email from my boss a little bit off, right? And so we've become, a machine that can identify safety, but it's not as nuanced as it needs to be. It's the world that we're living in. And so what you need to know about that is that part of our brain, the amygdala, that is constantly assessing safety, actually is putting a lot of us into threat mode right now, because for a lot of reasons, people don't feel safe. And so what happens is our body actually responds to that, right? We have all this adrenaline and cortisol is released, less oxygen goes to our brain, which is really important. And a lot of our executive functions that are in our prefrontal cortex go offline, which means it's harder to think, it's harder to be a good problem solver, it's harder to be creative. So if you're in that threat mode, it's so much harder to do the work that we're paid to do every day. And there's a really great neuroscientist, David Rock, who identified these 5 areas that basically are responsible for either creating threat mode or putting us into reward mode. And we actually teach this in our change workshop, because I think a lot of managers can create threat mode even when there's not a crazy thing going on in the world. And these 5 things are status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So you can imagine in a quote unquote normal world, something like a reorg could trigger a bunch of those for someone. And certainly in today's world, almost all of those could be potentially impacted. So a lot of folks on your team may be in a place where they can't show up the way they want to, because literally their brain is in a different place. And so it's really important to recognize when you're in threat mode, because you may be doing things that are impacting your team even more. For instance, one of the things I've seen a lot lately is managers or leaders that are kind of in a fear mode or threat mode, and they're trying to create certainty for themselves. So they end up over-managing, micromanaging their team and processes, which in relation takes away some of the autonomy that their team has. And it just turns into—
You want to do your work.
Exactly. Best intentions, but starting to have impact on each other in really negative ways. So creating this intense threat mode situation. So it's just really important to understand that you might be in that place and your team is probably in some form of that, and to recognize how that's impacting each other.
I remember reading the SCARF. I will abbreviate those 5 together. SCARF. I don't know if that's a good abbreviation, but it's how I remember it. And for me, we talk about that a lot with even our kids too. Like, you don't want them responding all the time out of fear. I don't want to keep telling them, like, if you run in the street, you'll get run over. Yes, that's true to some degree. What we want them to do is make good choices and have a sense of control about their own self, and not always feel like they're in that kind of fear moment. This kind of leads me to a question that we were talking about before too. Like at Abstract, we believe in the value of visibility and full transparency, or transparency to a degree, in our design work. Being the design delivery platform that we are, we kind of break down these silos between makers and others, but it does require a level of humanity. One of our colleagues shared that, I love this statement, Sean, I'm going to kudos to you, bud, said, transparency without trust is just surveillance. So now that many of us are like newly remote from one another, we can really benefit from working transparently, to your point, like you said. But how do you see trust coming to play and helping us feeling that feeling of surveillance? Or maybe let me trim that question down to, like, how do we inject trust to bring good humanity to the way that we work?
I love that phrase, because I think it's so true. I think the most important thing that leaders should be doing right now is redesigning their alliances with their teams. So we talk about design department, this idea of designing an alliance with someone, because it's so easy to jump into a relationship and just start working. And then when things don't work, you're like, oh, wait a second, we should have constructed some ways to work together. So in theory, you have this agreement or this alliance with people. And look, it doesn't matter if you didn't create one before now. Now's the time to do it, because so many of the underlying things have changed. So if you sit down with someone and say, like, hey, what do you need right now? What hours are you working? What's going on for me? Really leading from a place of curiosity and co-designing those new expectations. And if you have alignment on the expectations today, then it's much easier to have trust going forward. And it's also much easier to deal with performance. I love that we have transparency in the way that we work, but if you're monitoring the way that people work through, how many hours, or are they in their files, or that sort of stuff, that's really unhealthy, and that's not going to get us to the trust that we need. Yeah.
I really think so. I mean, you have the ability, but with all things, great power, requires great, I don't know. What is that? What is that line? With a lot of responsibility comes with that kind of great power. Awesome. So one thing I've been thinking about is, we moved into this sort of remote space, but I've been thinking about there may have been broken trust before we even congregated back home. What do you say to someone who's trying to build or maybe rebuild now that we're remote? Or like, what about we're just coming off a bad situation, and can it be made better now being remote?
I think it can. I mean, I think it really comes down to resetting and saying, like, look, this wasn't working. We're in a new world. Let's figure out how to make it work now. And that collaboration, that conversation can be incredibly hard, but that's the hard work that gets to a healthy, trusting relationship. So it might be things like talking about communication, expectations, all of that sort of stuff, to be clear about how you're going to work together. And it can be rebuilt, but it's not going to be rebuilt if you aren't aligned.
What happens when? What kind of aligning techniques do you sort of suggest in in that rebuilding, that co-designing thing that you were mentioning even before?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing to remind them of what hasn't changed. So when it comes to performance and evaluation, a lot of the expectations haven't changed. So maybe your levels are the same, your role expectations are the same, the goals and objectives of the company may also be the same. Maybe they change, depends. And remind them what is the same, but then the things that need to change, that's where you realign. So you might talk about, in today's world, communication is really hard for me. And I'm overwhelmed by Zoom calls. So I need more asynchronous communication with you. And you might talk about what asynchronous communication looks like. Maybe it's better in email than Slack, because Slack is interrupting you and triggering you. And just to be clear that, some of the old ways of working may not work right now because it's so intense. And to try some things and experiment and see if it works.
Love that. I mean, it is, maybe an opportunity for, like, I've been sort of thinking now at this point, I don't know, maybe it's like a 40 days. The number 40 is like a number that is meaningful culturally to us to some degree. But we're approaching about 40 days, at least where I'm at, where I'm living, of being at home. And I'm not necessarily looking to, quote unquote, get back to normal. Maybe there's a new normal that's going to sort of rise up out of this. And to your point, like, being precise about the communication tools, like moving from Slack to email is maybe that's a good thing. I'm nothing against Slack. I think Slack has a great need for certain things, but the new normal may be different than what our old normal was.
Yeah, and that may change for each individual depending on where they're at and what's going on for them. And so again, leading with curiosity and checking in with your team to understand where they're at will give you a better sense of how often, you need to realign. It may be that, in this new norm, I'm calling this our new norm because I think we're going to be here for a while, but
okay.
It may be that every 40, 60 days, whatever it is, that you have to realign with your team because maybe they're in a different phase of this. And that's okay. Just knowing that you have to adapt and flex to where your team is at. And I don't think there's any good or bad communication. It's just what that individual needs at that time.
Oh, that's great. There maybe isn't always good or bad communication, but what they need at the time would align. We should keep that. That's a pull quote. We'll put that one in the pull quote bin. So I'm just going to do like a real talk thing here. Real talk. It has been weird the last few weeks. Can you tell us a bit about being resilient as we kind of attempt to build trust among our colleagues? Sort of that resiliency. What are we doing with our colleagues, our friends, and our family here?
Yeah. Well, we've always talked a lot about resilience at design department and within, because we work in tech and it's always changing in itself, right? The organizations are changing, the context in which we're designing. Mm-hmm. And so resilience is important. And even now, even more important. And again, that's because I'm starting to set expectations with folks like this is our new norm. So to be sustainable in these roles and then this new norm for some period of time, we need to invest in our resilience. And I think it's really, really hard and really important that leaders are investing in that resilience right now, because people are looking at us to be able to respond quickly, to have the patience, to hold steady, like all of those things that you expect of a great leader. But we're also going through the same things as our teams in the same time. And so if we're not, investing in our own resilience, how can we provide and be present and hold space for them if we're not taking care of ourselves? I like to use a lot of metaphors here, like put your oxygen mask on before putting it on others, or filling up your gas tank so that you have the inner resilience that you need to show up in the right ways. I think some of the best things that you can do are really about leading by example and letting people know that you are doing it. In our workshops, we talk about 4 different areas that you can invest in: mindset, wellness, connection, and purpose. So, one of the things I want to remind people of is they don't have to do everything right now. One thing is enough. And that might be as simple as just taking a mental health day. And that's one of my favorite things right now, because I feel like we all could use a little bit of a break. And if you're taking mental health days, then that signals to your team that they can do that as well. So lots of ways that you can invest, as long as you are investing. That's the key point.
I like that. Like, you give an example, and sometimes that example is you're really being a human in a way that they might not have seen before, and that may be our new normal. Is leader to team. I'm in the same space as you, and there's a lot of consistency, homogeneity in that experience that we're all sort of going through, but we're all doing it in different ways.
Yeah.
Hey, well, I do appreciate everything you've shared here. Is there any last kind of benediction piece that you want to share with us before we take some Q's and A's, give some A's?
I think the most important thing here is just to lead with curiosity. We didn't mention this at the beginning, but most of us are in a very privileged place. The fact that we can work from home, that we have jobs that allow us to do this. And so leading with curiosity allows us to understand that lots of people around us may have different experiences. And I think that's the most human thing we can do right now, is lead with curiosity and be compassionate. So whatever form that takes for you.
I love that. That's going to change the way that we make things. I hope that the new normal that you're talking about actually has great output for all of the products and designs and creativity things that our teams here or on this call and others are making. And we'll look back on it with, yes, it was a difficult time, but we're going to be different because of it. And we saw that come from the curiosity that we put into the work that we did. Yeah. Mia, would you mind taking some questions from the crew here?
Sure.
I'll read them off to you, so you don't have to find them here in Zoom. Somebody mentioned here, so a couple of my colleagues have said to me that they find it really hard to switch off, basically, and equally they kind of feel guilty when they're not working. How do you kind of manage that, or what you suggest to a person in there?
I've heard that from a lot of folks lately. One thing I would do is check in with them to see if working more is one of their coping mechanisms. And if it is, it may be okay, not necessarily sustainable, but just recognize that that's what's happening. If it's not what they want, then you can work with them to build some boundaries. So the other day I saw a mom had posted her kid's school schedule on Instagram, and it had walk to school and walk home from school. And obviously they're not walking to or from, but I loved it because it was really building in this transition. Like, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to come home. I kind of think we need the same thing, right? As adults, this is my commuting time. This is my transition time. And it sets boundaries on our calendars for our colleagues, and it sets boundaries for ourselves, even if that's literally walking from your couch to your kitchen table, creating some sort of moment, some sort of ritual that helps you with that balance. And then in terms of the guilt part, I think a huge part of that is on leaders to set expectations that taking time off is actually one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves. And taking rest. I mean, we know this. If we work too hard, we're not creative. So we need to be able to have that space and time to rejuvenate. It just looks a little bit different right now.
I totally agree. There is having been a remote worker now for almost a year, I have weird things. I have a pair of slippers that I only wear for work. They're slippers, but they're my work slippers, which I don't know if many people have that kind of in there. Maybe Mr. Rogers to some degree, but that's transition moment for me. Yeah, so we're in the same space. By the way, I have been watching Mr. Rogers episodes, old ones, and they do make me feel pretty good. That's a bonus material piece. Oh, great answer. So can I ask you another one? So so somebody asked here, I once had a fully work from home position, and I found it more difficult to build and maintain personal relationships with friends and colleagues, which leads to trust, maybe trust building. In the day-to-day, like, what are some best practices or tips on how to better do this remotely?
Yeah. So remember, in those 5 things that we talked about before, relatedness is the R in SCARF. And so relatedness is so critical to our ability to feel good and to have healthy social norms. So, when this whole kind of remote thing happened, I saw a lot of people doing happy hours. Well, that's great for some people, but that actually excludes others. So it's important to think about a range of ways that you can build connection. So for managers, I talk about thematic one-on-ones, where they have different themes each week that they talk to their reports about. And one of those might be purely connection. And the whole goal is just to connect on a human level. Or I think a couple of companies are doing snack time together, just finding different ways. And I highly encourage people to look at asynchronous ways to build connection. For instance, we've been talking about sending care kits to each other, ways to show that you know each other and you connect and you relate, but not necessarily on a Zoom call, because I think we all could use a little bit of a mix there.
Yeah, a lot of our work is Zoom. It's almost like, would you do a happy hour in my little tiny cubicle type thing? No, you'd rather do that at the bar, but you're right. I think there's some interesting ways that we're sort of approaching it with the technology that we have at our disposal. Can I ask, this is a good question. I really love this one. How much can I or should I share my team about my challenges and my struggles?
That's a hard one, because it's always kind of a gray, thin line. I think letting them know that you're human and that you're not sure about things sometimes is okay. And to say, you know what, I don't have all the answers, I don't know, and maybe I'm having some feels too. But I would be careful about how much you reveal. And I'm only saying that not to say that you should, hide things from your team, but if they're in a threat state, if they're anxious and they know that their leaders are also extremely anxious, that's not reassuring. And so there's this tricky balance between being real, being human, and acknowledging and normalizing these feelings, and also increasing fear and anxiety. So that's just something to watch out about. And again, that question that I mentioned before, how does this serve the team, is a really great filter, because sometimes as humans, we like to reveal information because it makes us feel good. And so I think that's the line that you want to watch for, that you're not revealing information because it makes you feel better. That's what your coaches, therapists, partners, whoever are for. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's like you have to, once you share it, the other side has to sometimes do something with it. And I get that feels good on one side, but maybe that doesn't necessarily feel good on the other. I think it's a good question and a good way to balance things. I'm in. Yep. Okay. I thought I was in the wrong view here for a second here. This is a really good question. What does trust establishment or kind of building mean for folks who are brand new to a team in this environment, like a totally new type of employee?
Yeah, I can't imagine starting a new job right now. But I think the most important things is setting expectations. So, I work with all my teams to make sure that they have clear expectations around what good performance looks like, what good design looks like to the team. Talking about designing that alliance with that individual from the beginning is such a great way to start out a relationship. And setting these expectations allows you to have consistency and a common understanding, which over time builds trust, or over time trust can be built on. But without that common understanding, it's really hard for people to feel secure in a relationship. So I would start there and then continue to invest in getting to know each other and being curious.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It is a difficult time to join a new org now. I'm hoping for the sake of our industry that there will be more hiring of folks who sort of had the effects of things. And so maybe it will become a part of our kind of work cultural vocabulary of being able to communicate newness in this remote world, and kind of partnering with people on the side there.
I know a lot of companies trying to
Go ahead.
reinvent the onboarding process.
Yeah.
But in the absence of that, it's really on managers and leaders to establish that.
Yeah, and I hope that that would also then carry forward, you know, when they get back to the office or when they're back into face-to-face type things like, and wash their hands when they shake their hands after shaking hands or something like that. So yeah, yeah, I've been doing the elbow bump for years. I'm way into that. So can I ask one more question here? It's sort of on the other side of the how much should I share side, the how much should I share question. It's how do you approach a coworker who's like clearly struggling but not really willing to open up about what's going on?
Yeah, things are really complicated right now. So it's possible that you'll run into a bunch of people who don't feel comfortable revealing, or quite frankly, I think a lot of people don't even know how to communicate how they're feeling. They're just feeling not good. And so if you notice that they're struggling, one, offer, say like, hey, I'm here. If you need someone to talk to, I'm available. But the other thing I really want to reinforce with folks right now is that things are incredibly complicated because, again, people are in threat modes, they're experiencing grief, trauma, all kinds of things that we are not trained or equipped to deal with. And so I think one of the things that I think all managers should have in their toolkit right now is a list of resources that they can share with their team that says, hey, if you're having a hard time, here's a couple of places that you can go to. And a lot of HR teams already have this. Maybe it's counseling through your health insurance or some other resource, but really sending them to experts. Because I think some of these topics are well beyond what we as leaders are capable of dealing with. And that's okay. It's okay to not be their therapist. It's okay to not be their depression hotline, right? And so give them the tools that they need instead. That's far better.
Yeah, make the connection for them. I love that. So we're sort of at time here, Mia. I've got a lot out of this. I'm looking forward to watching the recording of it myself. So that's good. I feel good about that. Friends, we're going to send a poll to everyone here just to kind of get feedback on how things are going. And we'll send an email too with the follow-up and some other information following up. And I think we're going to be able to sort of share a bit of a continued blog piece. And I'm looking here on the chat, and somebody said I could listen to her all day. I think you can totally listen to me all day if you want. There's some workshops you can jump in with the design department, and that might be cool to do that. So let me just end with this, Mia. Thank you so much for your contribution, not only to this time here, but just your contribution to the design industry and to the leaders out there. I know I, for one, have been changed by your work, and I'm excited to just to partner with you in this conversation. So thank you so much. We're so glad to have had you here today.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for the helpful conversation, and thanks for all of you out there for listening. Yeah.
Absolutely. So friends, again, if you wouldn't mind taking the poll, that'd be awesome. Let us know how we did. And if you have any further questions, you can hit me up for sure if you'd like, either on LinkedIn, Twitter, or email, or I don't know, fax me. However we want to connect in the future, I'm open to that too, and we'll see if we can make some connections for y'all. Thanks again. We'll talk soon. Bye, everybody.